Welcome to the deep dive. Okay, here's a riddle for you to start us off today. How can a nation in Europe, one that's linguistically really quite isolated, also have one of the most genetically diverse ancestries on the continent?
It's a great question, and it really gets to the heart of what we're talking about. It's a puzzle that's, well, it's fascinated scientists for ages, and it brings us to this informal idea of the Hungary gene.
Right, the Hungary gene. And just to be clear for everyone listening, this isn't like one single gene we're talking about.
No, not at all. It's more of a shorthand, really. A way to talk about Hungary's incredibly complex, sort of multi-layered genetic makeup.
A makeup that's been shaped over, what, centuries? By
Yeah.
conquests, migrations, all sorts of things, even isolation.
Exactly. And, researchers have been scratching their heads over Hungarians for a while, not just because their language, Magyar, is, well, it's a real outlier in Europe, no close relatives nearby, but also because the DNA tells this unexpected story. It's this incredible mix of East meets West, hints of genetic bottlenecks, and really deep roots going way back into Eurasia.
So that's our mission today, then, to really dive deep into this genetic mystery.
That's the plan. We'll explore what the science is actually showing us and maybe just as importantly, why it matters. What can it tell us about, human history and genetics more broadly?
Okay, let's start unpacking that genetic blend then.
Yeah.
It sounds truly fascinating. What makes the Hungarian gene pool so, well, different from its neighbors? I mean, they're right there in Central Europe.
Yeah, that's what's so striking. You've got Slavic speakers, Germanic speakers, Romance language speakers all around them. Yet, genetically, Hungarians kind of stand apart. Their genetic profile shows this really noticeable mix, an admixture of Central Asian, Uralic, and European elements. And this specific combination, well, it challenges some of the standard ideas we might have about how populations move and settle.
So this unique mix, it really points back to the origins of the Magyars, doesn't it?
Yeah.
The people who moved into the Carpathian Basin. When was it? Around the 9th century.
That's right, around the 9th century, and they came from the Ural Mountains region, which is, far to the east of where Hungary is today.
And the DNA actually reflects that journey. What does it tell us?
Oh, it tells us quite a bit. There was a big genomic study back in 2022 from the Hungarian Academy of Sciences, actually.
Okay.
And it showed that modern Hungarians carry roughly about 10 to 15% Uralic-Siberian ancestry.
Uralic-Siberian. Can you unpack that a bit? What does that mean genetically?
Sure. So basically it refers to certain genetic signatures, specific haplogroups, which are like ancestral family lines that are really common across Siberia and the Ural region, markers that look quite different from what you typically see as dominant in, say, Western Europe.
Interesting. So 10, 15% Uralic-Siberian. What makes up the other, 85, 90%?
Well, that's where it gets even more layered. The rest of the gene pool is incredibly rich. You see markers linked to Germanic groups, Slavic groups, Turkic peoples, even some signals pointing towards the Middle East.
Wow. So it's a real melting pot, genetically speaking.
Absolutely. But here's the kicker, the really big puzzle. Genetically, they're this diverse mix, heavily Europeanized over time, yet linguistically, they've held on to Magyar, this Finno-Ugric language that's totally distinct in the region.
That is the great disconnect, isn't it? Genetics leaning one way, language holding firm in another.
Exactly. Genetically assimilated, you could say, into the European landscape for the most part, but the language remains this ancient outlier. It's why it's often called one of the biggest puzzles in modern population genetics.
Is this linguistic isolation alongside such genetic mixing? It's a fascinating paradox. How do geneticists even try to figure that out? What does it teach us, big picture?
Well, it really highlights that language and genes don't always travel together. They don't always follow the same path. It teaches us that culture, things like language, can be incredibly resilient. It can persist, even become dominant over centuries, even while the genetic makeup of the people speaking it is changing quite dramatically through mixing and assimilation.
It's a testament to cultural endurance, then.
A powerful one, I think.
Okay, now, let's shift gears a bit. This next topic is, well, it's intriguing, but also quite sensitive. It's about intellectual achievement.
Ah, yes.
The Nobel Prize connection.
Exactly. Over the last century or so, Hungary has produced a really quite astonishing number of Nobel laureates per capita, especially in fields like math, physics, medicine. You might not know this, but Hungary ranks, I think, #6 globally in Nobel Prizes per capita.
It's a genuinely remarkable statistic, yeah. And it has led some scientists to, let's say, cautiously ask the question, could there be some underlying genetic factors contributing to this?
And often that discussion points towards the Ashkenazi Jewish community within Hungary, right, which historically has had very high rates of academic achievement and, yes, is genetically distinct in some aspects. That's often part of the conversation, yes. But, and this is really crucial, there are very strong warnings from many, many scientists against jumping to simple genetic conclusions here.
Because it's a slippery slope.
Exactly. It can easily veer into really dangerous territory, things like scientific racism, eugenics, or just completely ignoring the massive role of environment, culture, history, education.
All the non-genetic factors.
Precisely. So the broad consensus among researchers today is that this high intellectual output is, well, it's complicated. It's likely a mix of things. Strong educational traditions, maybe a cultural emphasis on intellectual pursuits, perhaps even historical survival strategies developed under centuries of pressure and oppression.
So nurture, history, culture playing a huge role.
The dominant role, most would argue. But it's fair to say the conversation, approached carefully, does continue. It just underscores how complex these things are. We have to look beyond easy answers.
Right. Okay. Moving from sort of the mind to the body then. This unique genetic background in Hungary also offers some really interesting insights into health and disease, doesn't it? I understand Hungarians are sometimes a focus for studying rare diseases because of certain markers.
That's right. Their specific genetic history makes them sometimes uniquely informative for certain conditions.
Any specific examples that stand out?
Yeah, one pretty well-known example is a mutation in the HFE gene. It's called the C282Y mutation.
Okay, HFE C282Y. What does that do?
So the HFE gene normally helps regulate how much iron your body absorbs from food, but this specific mutation messes that up, and it can lead to a condition called hereditary hemochromatosis.
Iron overload disease.
Exactly. Your body just stores way too much iron, and this particular mutation is found at noticeably higher rates in Hungarian populations than in many others, especially in some rural areas in Western Hungary.
So that has real implications for public health screening there.
Definitely. It's a clear target.
Are there sort of protective markers too? Things that might be beneficial?
Yes, absolutely. Research has also found certain gene variants related to how we process fat's lipid metabolism that seem to be more common in Hungarians.
Like what?
Well, there's a specific version of the APOE gene known as APOE2.
APOE2. Oh.
This variant is involved in managing cholesterol and fats, and having the two versions seems to offer some level of protection against developing Alzheimer's disease later in life.
Really? That's significant.
It is, and it might partly explain why Hungary seems to have a somewhat lower incidence of Alzheimer's compared to some other Western European countries, even when you account for similar diets or aging patterns.
Wow. So these genetic insights, they're actually being used now to tailor health strategies.
Yeah, increasingly so. Understanding these population-specific risks and protections helps researchers and public health officials develop more targeted and hopefully more effective strategies, not just in Hungary, but potentially across Central Europe where similar patterns might exist.
It shows the power of this kind of research. But of course, with powerful data comes, well, potential for misuse.
Unfortunately, yes.
And the story of the Hungary gene, as we're calling it, definitely has a darker side, too. These genetic insights have sometimes been twisted for political purposes. We should probably address that directly.
It's a really important point to cover, absolutely. Because in recent years, you have seen some nationalist groups in Hungary trying to use genetic data, or perhaps misuse it.
How so?
Well, trying to make claims about, ethnic purity, arguing that Magyar ancestry is somehow special and needs to be protected from outsiders, using genetics to try and bolster nationalist narratives.
Which must set off alarm bells for geneticists.
Huge alarm bells. Geneticists are generally very quick to point out that population genetics is about understanding diversity, understanding connections, understanding human history. It's absolutely not about ranking populations or creating hierarchies or defining some kind of mythical purity.
Because the actual data shows the complete opposite of purity, right?
Exactly. The historical and genetic data couldn't be clearer. Hungary's genetic makeup is anything but pure in the way those groups mean it. It's this vibrant, complex tapestry woven over centuries with threads from Slavic peoples, Ottoman influences, Germanic groups, Jewish communities, Central Asian migrations.
It's a record of mixing, not isolation.
Precisely. It reflects the constant movement and mingling of people across the continent.
I heard a great quote from a researcher about this. Something like,
I think I know the one you mean. Hungary's DNA is not a fortress, it's a museum.
That's the one.
Yeah.
It puts it perfectly, I think.
It really does. It captures that sense of history in layers rather than walls.
So let's circle back then. We started with that riddle. Is the Hungary gene, this unique genetic profile, special?
Well, from a scientific perspective, absolutely, yes. It tells a genuinely fascinating story, a story about long-distance migration, about incredible cultural resilience with the language, and about these unexpected genetic mixtures that leave a really distinct fingerprint on the European map.
So scientifically, yes. Special, but socially.
Socially, and this is perhaps the most critical takeaway, it serves as a really powerful reminder. Genes tell us about history, about ancestry, about connections. They don't define worth. They don't create hierarchies. They reflect our shared, tangled human journey.
History, not hierarchy.
Exactly.
So maybe that leaves a final thought for you listening at home. A question to mull over, perhaps.
Yeah, does this story, the story of the Hungary gene, does it primarily inspire, cultural pride, curiosity about heritage, or does it carry a risk? A risk of fueling maybe more dangerous identity politics, ideas of exclusion?
Something to think about. Thanks for diving deep with us today.